Can you tell us why you think maybe I or other people might have been misunderstanding soul care or simplicity, how we might have been getting this upside down all along?
I think that our corner of the kingdom is hooked on checkbox spirituality. I do this, I read my Bible, I go to church, I call it the vending machine syndrome,
Yeah.
where we put in our little coins of faith and we expect all these goodies to drop. And then those goodies don't drop, meaning that God doesn't do what we told him to do in prayer. And so then we start kicking the vending machine when it's really all about desiring God, even though we may come to the end of our rope kind of experience to move there. I think that once we begin tasting the goodness of God, we just want more of God and we want to connect with God. We want to have that interactive life with God. And we begin to see that, okay, without this, we're only half alive.
Hey, friends. Welcome to the Holy Ship Show. I'm your host, Christine Crawford, and I'm so glad you're here. This podcast is for anyone willing to be curious, dig deep, and be surprised by God. You're joining me in the middle of the Draw Near, Dwell Well series, which is all about learning to live healed and whole. So what we're doing is exploring soul care and spiritual formation practices that help us overcome overwhelm and connect more deeply with God, ourselves, and others. If you haven't yet listened to the first two episodes of this series, I would definitely invite you to go do that. The first one is really just an introduction, but it's where I talk about some of the holy shifts that I've been navigating in my own life, including muddling through a prolonged season of grief and trying to heal physically, emotionally from a really painful marriage and an unwanted divorce. I share a lot about what this season of grief and growth has looked like for me and how I've been learning so much about who God really is, who I'm created to be, and what love really looks like. And then in the second episode of the series, we delve into the theology behind drawing near and dwelling well. We explore the invitation of God not to know more about him, not to do more for him, not to meet a long list of expectations that we think comes from him, but to learn to live healed and whole by drawing near to and dwelling well with him. So those first two episodes kind of break down the why, and now we're really getting into the how. So in this episode, we are going to explore the first of our soul care and spiritual formation practices so that we can actually start practicing. And that's my disclaimer. On all of this, I am not an expert yet in any of these things. I am practicing these spiritual practices, and I'm merely inviting you to practice it, practicing them with me. We've got to start somewhere, and it might as well be together. Am I right? So I want to start today by just taking a couple of minutes to share some thoughts I have on this particular practice, and then we're going to bring an actual expert on and learn from her together. So the first practice that we're going to look at is simplicity. And the reason that I put it first isn't just because I think it's really important, but because I feel like this practice clears the path for the other soul care and spiritual formation practices. You might remember in the theology episode, The Invitation, I talk about our hearts being the divine dwelling place of God. And if that's the case, then some of us need to do some decluttering. And we all love the idea of decluttering in theory, or there wouldn't be shows about it on HGTV. But we also know the challenges of it, or there wouldn't be shows like Hoarders. And some of us think we are holy hoarders. And we can laugh at that, and we should, because I think that humor is holy too. But so is God. And if he's our king, we need to remember that kings don't share thrones. So some of us could benefit from a holy shift, and we need to KISS, keep it simple, not stupid, but steward. Basically, we've reached the part where we get to get really honest and consider what things could be stripped back, pared down, scooped out, simplified, shifted, so that we can better experience God's presence, discern his will, and conform to his likeness. And some of us, maybe contrary to some things we've been taught, could actually benefit from simplifying our faith. We have a tendency to complicate prayer, faith, and obedience. And listen, faith is challenging and it's complex, but it isn't all that complicated. I don't know why we have the hardest time fathoming the simplicity of faith, understanding that this is really just a life of embracing the invitation to be with and become like Jesus. Instead, we try to develop fancy formulas. And listen, structure's good. Studies are helpful. Conferences are amazing. I am a fan and a perpetrator of all of those things. And I'm certainly glad that you're part of this ministry. But sometimes I think we will create systems and programs when God has simply invited us just to be with Him and enjoy Him. When we simplify our lives in faith, we create space to experience and enjoy His presence. When we simplify our lives in faith, we can shift our priorities to better align with our purpose. And when we simplify our lives in faith, we can invest more time in actually living out our true identities. But before we can simplify, we often need to clarify. So, what is our identity? What is our purpose? We talk a little bit about this in the theology episode as well, but another exercise that I think is helpful in simplifying is to discern our core values. And if you haven't thought a lot about your core values in a while, or maybe ever, there's no time like the present. We do talk about this in the episode with Emily P. Freeman, and this is something that I really flesh out more in the course and also big time in the spiritual mentoring. But you can do it now. What are the things that you value most in the world? And I think sometimes we think we know the answers as women, as Christians, maybe as people pleasers. We think we know the right answers, and we might be tempted to rattle off the things that we think makes God happy, which of course is the most important, but it's not the question I'm asking right now. Nor am I asking, what do you think the other people around you expect from you or want from you or for you? Those things matter because we want to love people well, but it's a completely separate question. This is, what do you value? What is it that you think you want or need in your life to experience joy, fulfillment, purpose, peace? The thing about knowing our core values is this really helps us set our priorities and make our plans accordingly. So then when we look at what we believe God wants for us and from us and what we hope other people are experiencing through us, we can marry these things together and get a pretty good idea of how to order our lives and prioritize our time. So this is something that I would invite you to do as part of simplicity. Maybe first and foremost, as you start thinking about practicing simplicity, take some time to think about, pray about what your core values are. The other thing about knowing your core values is it makes practicing simplicity a lot easier and a lot less painful, because simplifying is kind of our way of chiseling away what's getting in the way. This is how we can get rid of the things that don't match what matters most to us, or what's not in alignment with our purpose or conducive to connecting with God, ourselves, and others. It's challenging work, but also I've been practicing it, and I have found it so life-giving and liberating. I want to learn more about how less is more in faith and life. So I've invited an expert to come on and help us with this. Jan Johnson is a writer, speaker, and spiritual director who has degrees in biblical studies and Christian spirituality. She's written 23 books, including Enjoying the Presence of God, When the Soul Listens, and Abundant Simplicity. She's a frequent retreat and conference speaker, and everything she writes and speaks about flows out of three areas. The first one is spiritual formation. She helps people get rid of stubborn habits and ingrained character flaws to help build a more interactive life with God. So instead of striving to be good, like a lot of us do, Jan helps people connect with God in order to let God transform them. Jan also likes to partner with God in caring for the vulnerable and the voiceless. She loves to help people love all people the way that God loves all people, and to help us set aside the pull of materialism and live a more compassionate lifestyle like Jesus. I think we'd all agree that life today is characterized by too much activity and too little meaning. So she helps people focus on the substance and not the glitz. I don't know about you, but I say yes, please. I definitely want to be formed by God, to partner with God, and to live purposefully for God. So I can't wait to learn more from Jan and how simplicity helps us draw near and dwell well. So listen in and join us as we explore the upside-down kingdom of God as the right way forward in faith and life. Hi, Jan. Welcome to the Holy Shift Show.
Thank you, Christine. It's good to be with you.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so excited to have you come on and talk about simplicity to us, because this is your whole jam. This is what you do. I was looking over your work and looking at the amount of books you have written and all the work that you do. And first of all, wow, and congratulations. And also, I've noticed a pattern. Like there's so much centering on helping people connect with God in a more intentional and intimate way. And some of the ways you do that is like through spiritual formation practices. So I'd love to know more about like what drew you to that work and what you're hoping that your work and your voice is accomplishing in the world.
Well, I got into spiritual formation in a funny way. I had been through a major life crisis and I ended up in a 12-step group
Okay.
and I really loved it. And step 11 kept talking about prayer and meditation and constant contact with God. And so I sat there and went, I have a book about this. And I got out Brother Lawrence and
Ah,
started reading it like once a month for 5 years. And then I just started investigating lots of spiritual practices with the idea that's how we are transformed. That's how we find connection with God.
yeah, I agree. And I come from a background where we think connection comes from information and we think transformation comes from information. And listen, I am just confessing like my own situation there because I love to learn. And sometimes I'll substitute learning for intimacy or information for intimacy. And information is great, but it can't change our hearts. Only God can do that. And so drawing near to him and dwelling well with him is actually how we become more like him. So sometimes I feel like we overformalize or over intellectualize what faith is supposed to look like and we miss out on the transformation of God, but also just the joy of experiencing his presence. I'm like with you, it's been a by force introduction to spiritual practices and a by force awakening. I definitely had a close relationship with God, but I have never experienced him in his nearness the way I have done so in the last several months. And some of it's the suffering that I've endured, but some of it is also just the forced need to practice soul care, to slow down, to strip things back, to simplify my life.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I felt forced to do that, just by my own circumstances and health and that kind of thing, that I realized that was the invitation all along. Can you tell us why you think maybe I or other people might have been misunderstanding soul care or simplicity, how we might have been getting this upside down all along?
I think that our corner of the kingdom is hooked on checkbox spirituality. I do this, I read my Bible, I go to church, I call it the vending machine syndrome,
Yeah.
where we put in our little coins of faith and we expect all these goodies to drop. And then those goodies don't drop, meaning that God doesn't do what we told him to do in prayer. And so then we start kicking the vending machine when it's really all about desiring God, even though we may come to the end of our rope kind of experience to move there. I think that once we begin tasting the goodness of God, we just want more of God and we want to connect with God. We want to have that interactive life with God. And we begin to see that, okay, without this, we're only half alive.
I totally agree. I have never been more in love with Jesus than I am right now. And it's because, again, I'm experiencing him in a whole different way than I have before. I don't think I understood how kind God is. I've been teaching that he's good forever and ever. But I think that I have uncovered part of that vending machine mentality. And what happens is when we feel like we check the boxes or we do all the right things or we put all the right change into the machine and we don't get what we want, it could be easy to become very disillusioned with God.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people that are out there that are deconstructing. I think everybody should ask all the questions. I applaud that journey. Deconstruct and reconstruct as you find him. But I think some of the people are deconstructing because they were taught a formula. They were taught a vending machine faith and they did it right. They checked the boxes, they did the things, they followed the formula, and then God didn't come through the way they were promised he was going to come through. I think misrepresented who God is and what he wants for us and from us altogether. Like this isn't like our fault necessarily sitting in the pews. This goes all the way back to who's behind the pulpit, who they've been learning from, and how we've been getting the entire life of faith upside down pretty much since the beginning. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that it gets taught as a mechanical thing and it's totally relational.
Mm.
That God desires us and wants us. We get to respond and have an interactive life with God.
Yeah. And that simplifies things, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about following the formula. And in this fixated manic, if I don't follow the formula exactly right, God won't give me X. But also, some of us thought God won't love me. God might leave
Right,
me.
right.
And that's terrifying to think that we've got a God that abandons if we don't get the formula just right.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes if we've had experiences like that in our personal lives where other people have done that,
Yes.
it can be really easy to ascribe that to God and assume he's going to abandon us, everybody else has, if we haven't followed the formula. In your opinion, how might simplicity be vital to drawing near to and dwelling well with God?
Oh, boy.
I'm
The reason I ended up writing Abundant Simplicity was that I had learned a lot of that from Dallas Willard, my mentor, and working with him and being in his classes. But I would go to speak at churches and I would teach them really cool stuff about scripture meditation and hearing God and all this kind of stuff and solitude and silence. And they would, oh, this is so great. We want to do this. We're going to start groups. We're going to practice this. And then maybe they'd have me come back in a year or two. And I'd say, so how is all that going? And they'd say, we didn't do any of it.
Mm,
And they didn't do any of it, not because they didn't want to. They
mhm,
wanted to, but their life was too full. Their
mhm,
time was too full of many good things,
mhm,
but not the things that were the best things. They were spending a lot of time talking about everything, trying to hash over everything, and not really listening to other people, not really listening to God. And then owning all the stuff that I own that has to be taken care of and cleaned and
mhm,
all of that kind of stuff. And then the stuff that I want to buy because their life was taken up with taking care of their possessions, of all kinds of conversations about things that didn't really matter because of all of those kinds of things that
mhm.
simplicity really works at. Doing a lot of nice things that were really peripheral. There was no time to do the things they really wanted to do.
Yeah. And following a formula is easier. And to simplify our lives, I think so many of us, especially at the beginning, think it's a process of taking away. And in a way it is. It is a practice of self-discipline. But I think it's more of like the chiseling where you expose the art that's been in the stone. And I am finding it very liberating, which is very upside down from what I thought less is
Good word.
more. Yeah, it is. It's totally liberating, very life-giving, and it gives me more space and time and energy to focus on the things that matter most to me, that matter most to God, that actually serve other people. But it can be hard because we live in a world that applauds busy, that applauds activity, that gives us the formula, that applauds having things. And I just finished your book, Abundant Simplicity, and I did have a hard time with the frugality part. It isn't that I enjoy spending, although everybody enjoys spending money. It isn't that I love stuff, but I have found, especially as like a coping mechanism in this current season, what I really love is solutions. And so if I look in my life and I'm like,
That's
oh, I need to fix that. And there's things in my life I can't fix right now that I'm having to have a slow patience for God to show up and medicine to work and that kind of thing. And I'm like, but I can solve that problem right now on Amazon and I can buy that solution right the second. And so I'm constantly solving my problems on Amazon. And then, thank goodness, because I know I don't have the money to do those kinds of things, God bless the free return policy. I'm on a first name basis with the people at the
oh,
UPS store
yes.
because I'm always like, yeah, here, let's give this back. Some of us are really investing in solving our own problems or controlling the world around us instead of just simplifying our lives and trusting God to meet our needs. That's an area that I'm really having to grow and challenge myself in. And you're right. When we've got all this other stuff going on, even if it's good stuff, Jan, and some of it's great
Yes.
stuff, sometimes ministry gets in the way of being with God. But the better thing, the best thing, perhaps the only thing, is to be with him so we can become like him. And sometimes we just can't conceptualize that it really is that simple.
You said it well when you talked about space. More than anything else, Simplicity is about making space for God, making space in our time. Since you've mentioned Amazon, I'll just go to the finish line for just a second. It floors people when I say, yes, on Amazon, it has to be in my cart for a week.
Oh, a week.
No more one-click ordering.
Oh, I've only made it to 24 hours. I aspire to your week, Jan.
So the week, and by the time the week is done, it's interesting how many times I figure out, you know what, I think I need to do this instead. But a lot of it's about pausing and doing the heart exam. Why is it I think I need it? So my favorite illustration of that is I go into Target to get something I legitimately need, whatever it might be. And then you wander over to the women's clothes and you don't need anything, but you just want to see what's there. And I stop in the middle and I do the heart exam. What's going on inside of me? And I hear things like, you want to look younger. You want to not show up at every speaking engagement with the same shirt. I hear all that stuff in my heart exam. And now it's pretty good. Now I still look over there, but it's get out while you can because it's not really about who I want to be and what God is calling me to be.
Yeah.
It's about me trying to fix myself, me trying to look better, all those things, look thinner, look whatever it is. And that's all impression management. That's mostly what the first half of Matthew 6 is about. No more impression management, that we're slaves to caring about what other people think. And when I say that, you're going to have listeners that say, I don't do that. And I would tell you, I don't do that.
Okay.
But it's only when I really do that heart exam in the middle of it. It's only when I'm really overlooked or some even sense of rejection that I go,
Yeah.
I do care a lot about what people think. And one of my directees yesterday, it was so cool. She read Romans 2:29 to me, and it talks about seeking the praise of God, not other people. And she's telling me how it convicted her and everything. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah.
I wonder how much of our busyness is rooted in that too. And what I like/hate about your idea of the heart examining is then you have this opportunity. It's a hard thing to know about yourself. Oh, I want to look younger or thinner or whatever else, because some of us don't want to know that we want those things. But now you have an opportunity to go to God and say, hey, I'm really struggling with accepting myself how I am and where I am in this season of life and what I look like. And then you can work through that with God. But that's not the instant gratification fix that buying something off the rack is, or we think it is. It's like the fast food of spending. You think that's what you're craving, but then it only satisfies for a second. Or the first time you wash it, it disintegrates in the, in the washing machine. I'm wondering how much, and I know the answer in my life, the answer would be pretty high, how much of the things we're so busy doing and so distracted doing and spending on is about impressing other people, even impressing ourselves sometimes, instead of just being with God.
Yes. The white space on the calendar is very important.
Yeah.
Is being still and knowing that God is God, is watching sunsets, is taking a walk with my kids or whatever, or with a friend. Do we get that we need space for that? Otherwise you're just always planning, oh, I got to take this with me and that with me. And really your head just gets so cluttered, and you can expect people not to understand, to learn to live at a pace where you can be conscious of God all the time. So one of the things that I think we miss in spiritual formation is that the goal of spiritual formation is transformation. And so I always say, you do the connecting and God will do the perfecting. But it happens through that connection. And we've talked about that. What we can't do is always turn our eyeballs back on ourselves to see how we're doing. The focus of attention is always on paying attention to God, union with God, oneness with God. One of the things I like to do is I walk through life going, what would it look like to love God for the next 10 minutes? Or the rest of the Great Commandment, what would it look like to love the person in front of me who is now on a screen for the next 10 minutes? What would that look like? And I will have space to do that if I'm not thinking about, I need to put this in the car and I need to make sure this list is done. I need to probably move a bit more slowly to be able to do that.
Yeah. And I hate to speak for all of my listeners. I know we're all in different places, but I talk to a lot of the people in my community and they're exhausted.
Yes.
They're craving simplicity. I think we're all wishing we could strip it back and have more margin in our lives, have more white space on the calendar, have more rest, have more peace, have more time with God, have more time with the people that we love and be able to connect. That's what this whole series is about, is how do we overcome the overwhelm and connect more deeply with God, with ourselves, and with others. Why is it then, if I think we're all drawn to that, why do you think that we are also resistant to or even appalled by actually doing it?
It has a lot to do with impression management and meeting other people's expectations.
Okay.
That they expect us to do this or that, or we have to have the perfect gift when we arrive at whatever.
Hey, friends. So sorry to interrupt this amazing conversation, and I do hope you're enjoying it. But I just wanted to remind you of some fun new resources and opportunities that we have for you at The Holy Shift. For one, I wanted to make it easier than ever to connect. I'm eager to hear from you and to see if and how any of this Draw Near, Dwell Well series resonates. I'd love to know how you're growing and where you're struggling. So I encourage you to reach out to me via our Instagram account, which is at The Holy Shift Ministry, or via our Connect page on the website. This show, after all, is for you, so I want to hear from you. And because what I have been working on has meant so much to me, I've been sharing it with others in more private settings for a while now. That has allowed me to connect more intimately with you guys, and that's what I really love to do. See, I believe that we both grow and heal in community, and it has been incredibly rewarding to witness the relief, joy, and peace drawing near and dwelling well brings. So now I'm offering some of these resources and opportunities publicly, and you can find them under the new resources tab on the website. Now you'll notice several drop-down options there, including a Draw Near, Dwell Well page where you can access a free workbook that you can download for the series. I've put some scripture, quotes, and art in there that might be helpful, as well as some journal prompts and Holy Shift type questions to explore. It's a totally free resource, as well as a rather robust resource list that I've made where you can learn more about each of these topics and practices that we're going to be exploring here on the show. And then I have an entire Draw Near, Dwell Well online course available to you. This is a pre-recorded class that you can access instantly with a link and a password so that you can work through all this material in a slower, more convenient, and applicable way. I also get a lot more personal there, but I will tell you, it's a lot less like a course and more like a conversation. I am far too weary to put on my fancy pants these days. So you're literally going to get me in my garden, on my porch, and in my studio, just sharing the raw and real of what I've been learning. I do have some snazzy slides, an enhanced workbook, and some fun new bonuses in that course as well. And I'm also going to be offering a handful of times where I work through this material in a live small group setting so that we can workshop it together and even do some Q&A. And I'm now offering what I'm calling shift sessions, which are just opportunities for us to chat one-on-one and determine if, how, and when you can begin to make a holy shift in your own life. So if you want to go deeper in your faith, but you're not sure where or how to start, or if you need some help muddling through a question you have or a challenging truth you've learned, I'm here for you. You'll receive personal encouragement and practical guidance, and I'll help you clarify any mistheologies and misunderstandings of God's heart and will for you. And then if you really want to go deep, consider doing some one-on-one spiritual mentoring with me. I'd be honored to walk with you in your spiritual journey and encourage you as you learn how to live healed and whole. And if you want to help others draw near and dwell well, would you consider contributing to The Holy Shift? It helps support this work and enables me to continue to encourage others through this ministry. I operate as a nonprofit in partnership with the Women's Nonprofit Alliance, so all donations are tax deductible, and you can do this under the Contribute tab on the website. Again, all of that is available at theholyshift.org or via the links in the show notes. Okay, now back to our conversation.
I just recently, a very special person had a birthday, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I need to go figure out what did all that kind of stuff. And someone had just given me the most lovely candle that was very elaborate. I really liked it. And I thought, no, I'm going to regift this because this is exactly what she needs. And I need not to be in a store.
Ah, yeah. So you were able to prioritize. Like,
Yes.
yeah.
And it was very special, and she did love it. And you know what? I lived quite well without that candle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
amazing how so many of the things we think we need, we do not need at all.
no, and that's what I find by holding it in the cart for a week.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really do end up not just Xing out. I guess I don't need that after all.
Well, what if we take that metaphorically, the cart
Okay.
for the week, right? Because I have to have a picture in my head for something to stick. So
Okay.
I'm thinking, what if our lives are at the Amazon cart and anything we want to put in the cart before we check out, before we dive in, before we commit, before we whatever, what if we add it to the cart and we wait a week and we listen to God and we pray about it and we see if we really need to add that to our lives? Because my knee-jerk reaction is to say yes to whatever anybody's asking because I'm programmed to do that. Also, as Christians and Christian women, we're programmed especially to do that. If it's anything that's semi-decent or helpful, then we're like, yes, I have to. I think we have a hard time honoring our own needs and our own values and our own limitations sometimes. We think we're supposed to be super women. And so this idea that we have been both invited to and commanded to live simply. And again, Matthew 6 is the perfect illustration. And then the second half of Matthew 6 is talking about
Yes.
like, why are you worrying about what you're going to wear and what you're going to eat and what tomorrow is going to bring? Just seek me and seek to live like me. And all these other things will be added unto you. Like, it really is the thing that orders our entire lives if we seek first the kingdom and his righteousness. And yet, we just have the hardest time not putting the cart before the horse.
Yes.
Mm.
And but once you start doing it, you really get hooked because you have more space for God and you really don't need all those things.
Yeah.
And it just becomes delightful to clean out your closet. I have a student who did what is it I say, 40 items, 20 items or whatever. And he dresses well.
Okay.
But he actually did that experiment and he just said everything was easier.
Yeah.
Everything was just better that way. And to
Mhm.
be able to, even if I have to put everything in this bag that is dated 6 months from today and put it in the garage, not give it away yet,
Mhm.
but put it and see if I dig anything out.
Yeah.
Even if that's what I have to do it,
Yeah.
I think it begins to feel liberating. I
Yes.
don't really need all this stuff.
Okay, so I grew up very poor and I moved a bajillion times. So I'm in my 40th house right now. That
Mm.
can sometimes make you love a house
Yes.
too much and love some stuff too much, or the ability to buy yourself what you want or eat what you want. It can make you fixate on those things.
Yes.
So I have a background in real estate and design and have moved a million times, like I said. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to finally design and build my dream house, which means a lot to a girl like me that has
Yes.
never had that kind of thing. So I did, and I loved it. And I bought all of the beautiful things to fill it. And it was wonderful. And people came over and they loved it. And it was a safe space for people and a comfy space for people. But it didn't solve the problems and it didn't fix the things in me that really were the broken parts that were needing that kind of thing. And there is nothing wrong with having a beautiful house. There's nothing wrong with having a large house. I know some people who have an enormous house and they use it. They're very hospitable and they use it to host people and have events. They're great stewards of what they have. So there can be nothing wrong with that. But when I had to sell that house and move into a house that was roughly half the size of
Yes.
it, I had the opportunity to simplify. And I was at the stage of my life where it was forced, but also welcome. And so I simplified. I pared it all down. I got rid of so much stuff. I sold a bunch of stuff, donated a bunch of stuff. It was great. Moved into this house half the size, put everything away. Everything was neat and orderly. And I was so happy to have it simplified. I was so excited. And I didn't miss half the stuff. I didn't miss any of the stuff. And then I got divorced and I had to move again. And the place I'm in now is this tiny little cabin on 2 acres on a creek. It is my little dream spot, but it's tiny. So I had to simplify again. And of course, divorce forces that because you have to give half your stuff away anyway. And now I'm in this cabin. I'm like, why did I ever need that other stuff? This little tiny simple space is the safest place I have ever been in my life. This brings me joy. And there's nothing fancy to it, but there's beauty around it. I spend a lot of time because now I have more time with my hands on the dirt, creating things, talking to God. I simplified my calendar by force when my health took a really bad turn. At first, I would talk to my therapist and I would say, we have to get me back to normal. We have to get me back. And finally, she was like, honey, that wasn't normal. Do you really want that back? And I'm like, oh, I don't. I don't want that back. But I didn't know it wasn't normal. I didn't know that was an unhealthy schedule. I didn't know any of that until I had to strip it back. And now I would never go back to, or I say that, I hope I never go back to that pace, to that much stuff. But I feel the draw in me. And I think you're right. A lot of it has to do with impression management. A lot of it just has to do with the culture that we live in too, because we've got people shoving stuff in our faces all the time and convincing us that our lives are not complete unless we have them. Would you say that's part of it?
Yep.
Yeah. That's why we all know that consumerism is a problem. And then it has, which this is a different conversation for a different time, I'm sure, but it's bled into the churches. So now even the way we sit in the pews and look at church and leadership and community is consumeristic. What's it going to do for me? What am I going to get out of this?
Yes.
Instead of humbling ourselves and understanding this is an opportunity to commune with God and like God with the people of God.
And to give to others and to realize the people in this church that make me crazy are God wants me to just talk to them about them and see how I might be a blessing to them, even though that would seem weird to most people. Now, something you said, Christine, or you began to allude to when you talked about your fingers in the dirt. What you're doing there is you're creating order and you're creating beauty. And we must never think that simplicity is opposed to beauty necessarily. Simplicity doesn't have to be ugly and it doesn't have to be plain. We can still create beauty.
I totally agree. And going back to your point a while ago before I got off on my tangent about it, that simplicity is what creates the space so we can do it.
Yeah.
I didn't get to play in the dirt that much until I simplified my life.
Really?
Yeah. I thought I had a brown thumb. I thought I was terrible at everything. And people who knew me in my earlier stage where I didn't have the time or the energy to focus on creating that kind of beauty now would be like so shocked to pull up in my driveway. As it turns out, I love gardening. Instead of just designing inside stuff, I'm now doing exterior design and helping other people create beautiful spaces outside. And since I'm such a little hippie poet and love to be outside all the time, it makes me so happy. And you're right, simplicity is not the absence of beauty. In fact, I feel like simplicity is what makes room for us to notice beauty, to appreciate
That's a
beauty.
good point.
Can we talk about like practical stuff first? Because simplicity can feel super overwhelming. Like, where do we start? Because again, we all want it. But if we're overwhelmed, figuring out how to undo the overwhelm can feel overwhelming. So one practical thing that I have folks do when I'm doing real estate stuff or design stuff is yes, no, maybe piles. So I have them, this for sure has to stay if they're doing their closet or their pantry, whatever. This for sure has to stay. This I can get rid of. And here's my maybe pile. And what ends up happening, what you were saying in your book and earlier on the show, is we find out like the box in the garage that we thought we needed, we don't need. We find out that most of the maybe pile can actually be a no pile. It doesn't have to be the yes pile, but yes, no, maybe helps people slowly shift into that frame of mind. What would you recommend for a beginner? Where is like one place or two places that they could just begin to practice at this practice?
It depends on which kind of simplicity you're looking for. One that's very important to me is simplicity of speech, which is interesting because part of what I do for a living is talk. And you know what? We're some of the sickest people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone asked me a question. I want to roll out the whole paragraph that's in page 75 in my book.
Right.
But that idea of being quick to listen and slow to speak, to be able to make a goal that when I'm talking to someone, this is really hard. This is like advanced, okay? To
Okay.
be able to say, I will not think of what I am going to say in reply. I'm not going to think about what I'm going to say. I am going to fully listen to this person in front of me. Not only that, but I'm going to read this person. How is he standing? Why is she like hunched
Mhm.
over or whatever? And then to be able to ask them questions. I first noticed this when I was in college and there was a group of us and we were getting to know each other, and it was like, my high school had 400 people in it. And the next one said, oh, my high school had 2,000. And I thought, what about if we just looked at that person who started it and said, and how were the high school years for you? How was that? What if we took the next question rather than the knee jerk, let me talk about myself? Because we do that. Or we'll say, someone will say, I'm going to go make something such and such for dinner. Or I never make lasagna. Maybe ask her why she likes to make that.
Uh-huh.
But to be able to cut down on how much we have to talk, how much we have to say who I am. For my students, they would have to do a fast for certain things.
Mm.
One woman decided she wasn't going to talk for 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
That was the most fun paper to read. Her husband got on the phone with his mother and he didn't know how to talk to her. She always helped him talk. And instead, he kept looking at her and she just smiled. All I could do was pray for him. Then she said, and you know what? My 12-year-old son started talking to me. He knew I couldn't talk. So she said, I couldn't believe it. 12-year-old, we're going to middle school here. They don't talk.
Right.
And she just talked about the many things that happened. And that's a really drastic experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things are experiments.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
you just check them out. But being able to be in a group and to really hear what everybody's in book club, not offering your opinion right away,
mm-hmm.
listening to what everyone else has to say and following up with a question for them
Mm-hmm.
and letting the focus of attention be on the other person. And just when we write an email or a text, what would it look like if I just cut that in half? Do I really need to say all of that? Because that's part of how it works. And this goes over to social media, which that's what some of my students found that they fasted from too, which can really be time consuming. And what is it that I really want to communicate? Or just to be able to think about our conversation. Because like I would notice on those networking groups where you have to introduce yourself, I did the heart exam when I was doing those. And I found I wanted to be the funniest. I repented. And then I wanted to be the deepest.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then I had to repent from that.
Yeah.
And then I had to say, I just had to be simple and winsome. Oh my gosh, that was a weird one. And finally, I just thought, I'm not even going to think about what I'm going to say. I am going to listen to every other person and think of questions I want to ask them later based on what they said. Gosh, what a relief.
Yeah.
That was like loving the other person rather than me thinking about everything. Oh, don't forget to mention this about yourself. Don't forget to mention. That was such a learning curve for me. It was really good.
You're right. It's an advanced thing. And that one was one that caught me by surprise in your book. And it also was very convicting because as a communicator.
Yes, here we are.
Yep. And as being a ministry leader and also being a Christian, I think sometimes we think we're supposed to have all the answers and we're always supposed to have the wise thing to say. And there are times like I'm just excited. I get excited easily. So if somebody's saying something interesting, I'm like, ooh, what do you think about this? And blah, 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 blah. And I get excited. But a lot of the time, I think the pressure that I put on myself is I'm supposed to have the right answer. I'm supposed to be able to communicate it in a way that could change their life forever. That's a lot to put on myself, both as pressure and also to think that I have that kind of power. And it can be paralyzing when you think it has to be perfect. It's why I don't do a lot of shine or have my editor do a lot of editing. It's also why I don't edit because I know how I am and I'll fixate. I hand it to somebody else and be like, just make sure it's not horrible and try to just keep it simple because I really struggle with authenticity and I'm a verbal processor. So those two things together, when you're talking about yourself or trying to do something, the whole time you're like grading yourself, thinking,
that's a good way to put it.
It's a beat down too to have to live that way in your brain. And it keeps me from being present and really connecting with the other person. In my core values, connection is really up there too.
Yes.
And so look at that. I can connect better if I'm authentic. And if I'm authentic, then connection goes deeper because I'm not in my head thinking about myself the whole time. I'm actually paying attention to that person and I'll get to know them deeply. And I'm sure at some point they'll get to know me deeply. And I think that's part of it. We want to be known and that's okay.
Yes.
That's
to know
fine.
and be known. It is.
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
seen, to be heard.
Mhm.
But that's why it's good for us to just look at the person and think, what does this person need from me? And what
Yeah.
we're really asking is God, and pausing long enough for God to be able to give us ideas, or at least be able to work through us and we don't even know it.
Yeah. And I find anybody who's listened to 14 seconds of this podcast knows I tend to be verbose in my communication. But I find too that I've noticed this a lot about myself lately, that I respond so quickly that sometimes the first thing that comes out of my mouth is not what I think, or even how I'd like, or not how I'd like to communicate what I think. And what if it was okay to pause?
Yes.
What if it, like you said, like the listening and the pause, you've used pause several times today, and I really appreciate that. If we're really engrossed in the other person and we're really listening to who they are, it would make sense that we would pause before we would gather up and be able to offer our own thing. Instead of me always trying to have the knee-jerk thing to say, which oftentimes is the dumbest thing that I say, is whatever my knee-jerk spits out of my mouth.
And the pausing, that really is enormous. That works with time too. So you go to the doctor and you come out of the doctor's office, and to pause and just look at the sky, look at the trees around you, to be able to live in wonder, just to pause, that's not really going to take that much time.
Mhm.
But it says a lot about who you are and what you care about. And it changes our focus from, I got 10 things I got to do.
Yeah.
Because hurry just, it rips First Corinthians 13 out of the Bible. It's where I say, you're not as important as all the stuff I have to do.
And I love what you're so we're gonna explore slowing down later. We're gonna explore sitting still later in the series. And the next thing we're exploring after your episode is Sabbath and rest.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So it's and
Yeah.
I wanted you first when we're getting to the practices, because I know we've got to make space for these
Yes.
other practices. And so that pause, that taking a moment to cease the striving, to pause, is also a practice of rest and of Sabbath. So
Yes.
maybe that would be a really good place for someone to start, is just to begin practicing a pause before purchasing, pause before speaking, a pause before acting, a pause before accumulating or doing or whatever else.
And not to do it with this, I have to pause.
Yeah.
That would be good. But where is God in this?
Mm.
Is there any space, anything God is leading me to do or think or feel? Yeah,
'Cause it is an invitation, it's not a formula. And when I reached out to you, I told you, "Hey, we have a tendency to follow a formula." One of the things I don't wanna communicate with bringing these spiritual practices back up for people is, "Here's your new formula." This is not the new formula. This is an invitation. As we're ending today, would you mind maybe sharing what you think about that holy shift and the way that we see practicing these practices, what the whole point of them might be?
yes. So, some things to keep in mind with spiritual practices are that you don't need to do something just the way you read it in a book, or because you read it in a book, or because someone told you to do it. You want to ask Jesus, what kind of practice are we going to experiment with? And then as we experiment with it, we may need to tweak it. What could be more lame than a 10-minute Sabbath? For some people, that's going to be drastic.
Mhm.
And so to be able to ask Jesus to what to invite us into and how to do it, and then to remember that it's about focusing our attention on God, not making it about, oh, I did this and keeping a chart. Oh, none of that. But what helps me pay attention to God? And if you're finding putting your fingers in the dirt
Mhm.
is one of those things.
Mhm.
And so just being open to what God's ideas about this.
Yeah, and for those of us who struggle with all or nothing or perfectionistic thinking, then we're not
Eh,
saddled. Yeah, because we can be like, "Well, if I can't do it all the way, if I can't declutter my entire house right now, then I should." And you've got a saying that I love.
yes.
I'll have you share it, please.
Do it as you can, not as you can't.
Yes. Yes.
If you can do Sabbath for 1 hour on Sunday, go for it. Do
If
it
you
as you
can
can, and don't worry about how you can't do it.
okay. And if you can simplify one thing or start experimenting with simplifying.
Yes.
Yeah. Because this show explores the upside down kingdom, and of course, it's not the kingdom that's upside down, it's us. I'm thinking about Jesus's teaching that less is more in the kingdom of God. And he says that a couple different ways in some of the parables and then also more directly in the teaching. What would you say about this kind of, because I love the title of your book, Abundant Simplicity, and that feels upside down, right? The idea that simplicity has anything to do with abundance. So can you just end us talking about the upside down nature of this whole thing?
As I've practiced simplicity of speech, people have understood me better. What? As I've practiced simplicity of time, I've been able to love people better and receive their love better. And with simplicity of possessions, life is just so much easier. I have less that I have to think about, take care of, repair, all that kind of stuff. And I still have a lot of beauty around me. This really is the life that we were called to. All these things are added, as it says, seek ye first, and all these things are added.
Oh, that's so good, Jan. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
This was wonderful and convicting, but I'm really looking forward to getting freer and freer in this department. So thank you for all your great work here.
And Christine, you're doing that because you keep using the word invitation and inviting. I've noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
So you are allowing Jesus to invite us into freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Oh, I'm glad that I've made that shift in understanding in my own life. It's made all the difference in the world. And that's why I'm trying to be intentional about sharing it with other people. I want them to feel that too. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Jan. I think she's amazing, and I love how she simplified the concept of simplicity for us. And I also love how she gave some concrete and kind of convicting examples of ways that she's practicing simplicity. There are definitely some things that I'd like to integrate into my life as well. I've got a lot to learn here, a long ways to go, but I will say again that the simplicity that I am practicing so far, it sure feels like freedom. I want more of that freedom. I want more of Jesus, and I want that for you too. So I'm going to keep practicing the spiritual practice so that I can have more space and time to draw near to and dwell well with God. And I hope that this episode might nudge you in that direction as well. Now, if you want to know more about Jan or dig deeper into some of the things that we talked about today, make sure and check out the show notes. We've linked them up here to make it easy, but you can also go to the website. That's just theholyshift.org. And then there's a few things I'd invite you to do as well. One is make sure to check out the other episodes in this series. You might subscribe or follow. One, that helps people find us. And of course, we love that. But two, a lot of these episodes kind of segue into each other. And I really did package these all together because I feel like it works best as a bundle, so to speak. So make sure and check out those episodes. And then also, I would love for you to join our Holy Shift community. There's not any cost to this. There's no list of expectations here at all. You basically just subscribe to the newsletter. And what that gets you is just some bonus footage and basically the opportunity to see things before the general public does, and also gives you a direct way to connect with me, to ask questions, to give feedback, to hear about any other opportunities. And also, I would love for you to make sure and get the free workbook for Draw Near, Dwell Well. It's on the site. It's linked in the show notes. Like I said, it's completely free, but it offers some quotes, some scriptures, and some resources for next steps if you want to go deeper on this practice or any of the others. And then if you want to really go deeper, you make sure to check out the courses, the workshops, the spiritual mentoring that I mentioned earlier. And last but not least, if you want to support this work, if you want to support the show and this ministry, I would love for you to consider donating to the Holy Shift. All of this can be found easily on the website or in the show notes. And feel free, forward this episode to somebody who's really wanting to simplify their lives a bit and isn't really sure where to start, they and you are welcome to join me in practicing this particular spiritual practice. I hope this podcast will continue to help us all shift our perspective on Jesus and learn how to draw near and dwell well. Thanks again for joining me as I explore the upside down kingdom of God as the right way forward in faith and life.